Hey. So this is Erica Page. I'm the team leader, president of the Living Luxury Atlanta team, and just wanted to take a moment to go over one of the documents that you'll use when purchasing a home. So this is the big daddy. This is the main one, the purchase and sell agreement. Now this document is, let's see here, 8 pages long, but most of the, or all of the negotiable items are on the front page, so I'll quickly go over the front page, and then the back pages here, your signature page and your exhibit page. Just so you know, the reason we do this is because once we find the house, we don't want to then have questions. Sometimes we're moving quickly. There may be a lot of offers. Maybe you're out of town and we're making an offer or something like that. So better for us to go ahead and talk about this document now so that you understand it well, and we can make sure any questions are answered so that when it comes time and we find the one, we can be hot and heavy and grab it. Okay, so first of all, the offer date. This is the actual date that someone is making the offer. So today happens to be 12/14, 2019. Now, the reason why this makes a difference is because if the person happens to receive 2 or 3 offers, well, they're supposed to look at them in order. So if our offer came in on 12/14 and then somebody else's offer came in on 12/17, well, technically our offer is supposed to be looked at first. So purchase date or offer date is important. And then here is just the identifying information for the property, the city that it's in, etc. This is just like the normal mailing address that you would see, the county, etc. Let's see, I'm just filling some stuff in here. The MLS number, though it doesn't have to be in the MLS, that one's not important, but definitely the tax ID number, because sometimes, depending on the property, there may not be a main address. It may not, or the mailing address may be split. It may be 123 Main Street A, 123 Main Street B, easy to get mixed up. So it's always important that the tax ID number is in the document. So that's the identifying information. And then we also have the legal description of the property. This one is not an obvious description every single time, but as agents, we can always look up the deed booking page, in most cases in the tax records. Now, the tax records are something that we easily have access to, but the public doesn't necessarily as easily have it. So we either want to put in the deed booking page, or if we happen to have the full legal description, which includes the lot number, the block number, the phase, etc., we'll put that in as well. All right, moving on. Number 2 is how much are we going to offer for this property? That's the amount that we put in there. And then for sellers, for closing costs, now this is the only thing that legally the seller is allowed to contribute to. And we always try our best to get any and all, not only your closing costs, but closing costs includes things like lender fees, attorney fees, prepaids for taxes and insurance, admin fees, the transaction fee, all those things. We try our best to get that covered all by the seller. We want to use the seller's money if we can. Now, the seller is not required to pay this for you, but we always ask for it. And sometimes we may make an adjustment. Let's say that the seller says, oh, we're fine with the $199, but we don't want to pay $3,000 in closing costs. So because closing costs is something that comes out of your pocket right now, you may say, hey, I don't want to spend all my cash. So in order to get him to pay the $3,000, we may say, well, instead of $199, let's offer $202. So then that way we know our closing cost is covered, because this is the right now money, and the purchase price, that's part of the loan, which is the 30-year money. All right, so this is where those 2 things go. Now, next, section 4 is the closing date. So this is the closing date, the day that we're going to close on the property. That means the money's due, the down payment, the closing costs, all those things are due on that day. So we may say that we're going to close on the 30th. Many times we close towards the end of the month, sometimes on a Friday, Thursday, Friday, not always, it can vary, but this is what we're putting down. And once we put this in here, this is a date, this is a contracted date that we need to keep with unless all parties agree to change it. Now, for as far as possession, most cases we take possession at closing, meaning on January 30th, 2020, that day we're getting the keys and we are now on the property and are moving in. But occasionally, sometimes if we're buying a home, occasionally a seller will ask for a day or maybe two after closing in order to get out. You're not required to give it to them, but we certainly can. And it's kind of a courtesy to give them one. So we may say, okay, we're going to take possession 2 days later at 6 o'clock p.m. So we may do that, and then there's another document called a temporary occupancy agreement if we need it. Or let's say the seller says, oh, we need 7 days. So again, up to you whether or not you want to grant that to them. But I will say after about 48 hours, and we would normally start charging them a per diem to encourage them to hurry up and get out. It could be a nominal amount, $50, $75, totally up to you. Okay, the next thing is earnest money. So earnest money is something in the state of Georgia. It's not absolutely required, but 99.9% of contracts have them. And what it is kind of like I'm serious about buying your property money. It is refundable to you as long as we keep with the time limits on our contract, and it's usually 1% of purchase price, rounded up or down to the nearest thousand. So in this case, our earnest money would be $2,000. So let's say on closing day, you're supposed to bring your down payment money. Let's say that's $3,000 or $4,000, and your closing costs that might be $1,000. So you're prepared to come to closing with $5,000, but you've already submitted $2,000 in earnest money, so you would only owe the balance on closing day. Now, in the state of Georgia, we close properties with law firms, a closing attorney. And our preferred attorney is Allen Law Group. They have a couple locations across the Atlanta area. We find them to be pretty flexible and they accommodate us well. So we're always going to request that. It's not really required that we use our own closing attorney. Nothing to kill a deal over, but something that we attempt to do. If at all possible, we want for our attorney to hold the earnest money. Again, they're not required to, but we'd like for them to, because if by some chance we decide to terminate the contract and we need the earnest money back, well, I know how my attorney works. I know my attorney is going to return the money within 48 hours. Another attorney, another law firm may say, oh, we cut checks once a week or something like that. So I prefer that we hold the earnest money. Like I said, not required to. So here, this is the place where the earnest money goes, not up here. This is the place where the earnest money goes. So sometimes you've already submitted the earnest money, and if so, we would say we put the $2,000 in already. Or in many cases, we'll say, okay, we'll bring the $2,000 in 3 days after we have binding agreement, meaning all parties agree. All right, this next section talks about due diligence. This is kind of your time to have exactly that, due diligence. You get your inspection done. This is your time to drive around the neighborhood, make sure you want it. This is the time to check for where are the grocery stores, what's the taxes, all these things. We have a due diligence period. We usually ask for somewhere between 7 to 12 days. Of course, for the seller, the shorter amount of time, the better. But if by some chance we make a contract on a Monday and you're out of town and you yourself would like to attend the inspection and they can't get there till Saturday, you can't get there to Saturday, well, a 4 or 5 day due diligence period would be too short. So we kind of use, on average, I usually do 10 days, but we can always adjust that. Okay, so the rest of these things are not applicable, so we'll put that there. Okay, next, lead-based paint. Any property that was built before 1978 has the possibility of having lead paint. Actually, any property has the possibility of having lead paint, but lead paint was not outlawed until 1978. So if it was built before 1978, we absolutely are required to have a lead-based paint exhibit attached. But for this particular property, we'll say that it was not. Now, On this section, number 10, this is where we say who is representing who. Now, this is important because sometimes if the person that we're working with for the property we're buying, maybe the person that's representing them is not necessarily an agent. So we want to make sure that we put this here. So for us, we're always representing you as buyers, and our brokerage is Your Home Sold Guaranteed Realty. And then material relationship disclosure, this is usually blank, but if the seller and the listing agent were brother and sister, they'd have to disclose it here. Same thing for you. If I was representing you and you were my mother or father, brother or sister, I would disclose it here. Okay, now coming around the bend here, the section number 11 is time limit on the offer. We usually give them 24 hours in which to respond. So we are submitting this on 12/14/2019. So we'll say that we need to hear back from you by 6 p.m. on 12/15/2019. Now, I will say that let's say somebody doesn't get to us by 6 p.m. That doesn't mean that they can't still accept our offer. It just means that if they accept our offer after 6:30 p.m., 6 p.m., and we don't want the property, we don't necessarily have to be bound to it. So that's really what that's for. All right, so that is the first page of the purchase and sale agreement. And as I said, in here is all the explanations of those sections. So I'll take us all the way here to page 7, and this is where we put exhibits. So if this property has an HOA, community association, we want to make sure that we get the disclosure that tells us the dates. We're going to always have a loan contingency exhibit. It might be VA, USDA, whichever one it is, depending on your loan type. This is what we're going to always have that in there. Hopefully, but not always, we're going to have a seller's disclosure. A seller's disclosure is a document that tells us the story of the house. So if they have one, we definitely want that and want to make it part of the contract. And then here's some other ones that we see sometimes, but just in case there's one like, oh, here's that temporary occupancy. If we were going to move in a couple days later, we would add a temporary occupancy exhibit. So all these things that could be added to our purchase offer. Now here is where we put special steps. So we may put steps like seller to repair loose banister. That might be part of our offer. We may say seller to provide termite letter. One that I put in a lot is seller to purchase a home warranty on buyer's behalf. Now, this is the one that gets kicked back a lot, and as you know from our meeting, that if they do kick it back, then we'll definitely take care of that. We'll make sure that you have that. So that's it. That's the page 7, the exhibits page, and then here is the signatures. So everybody that is on the loan and anybody only that is on the loan needs to sign here. And then we sign here. I'll sign here as well. And then that's it. We'll send it off. This binding agreement date, that is what gets filled in after all parties have signed and agreed. So we would make the offer. You guys would sign. I would sign. And then we'd send it over. And then if they accept it, the seller would sign. That agent would sign. And then once they send it back to me, the day they send it back to me is the binding date. And that's important because let's say that the seller signs on the 15th, but the listing agent is out of town or something, and they don't sign to the 16th, and now something else happens and they don't send it back to me until the 17th. Well, the 17th is our binding date. Not the 16th when the agent signed, not the 15th when the seller signed, but the date that I received it, that's the binding agreement date. And so this is a section that I, as your representative, fill in. Okay, guys, that is the purchase and sale agreement. Let us know if you have any questions. All right, so one of the ways that we protect your money is to make sure that we have a loan contingency exhibit as part of our purchase offer if you are getting a loan. So I'm just going to go over the FHA loan contingency, but there's also a VA loan contingency. So FHA is Federal Housing Authority. That's the pretty common loan. Then there's the Veterans Administration. That's a common loan. And then we also have a USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture loan. And then the other type of loan is conventional. So the one that we see a lot is FHA, VA, and conventional. So I'll go over this one. So we always say that we have a letter because this is an exhibit as a part of the contract. Exhibits and amendments are different. Exhibits are part of the original contract, whereas amendments are things that are added after the contract is signed. All right, here we go. So, of course, we have the offer date. That's going to come in automatically from our purchase and sale agreement, and so is the address. In general, we are only getting one loan, not also a second one. So we would mark that off, and we'd say that the loan amount, what percent of purchase price is our loan amount? So the most common one with FHA is you have to put 3.5% down. So the loan amount would be 96.5. But maybe you're putting 10% or 7 or 8, whatever it is, we will put that in here. So I'll put 96.5 since that is pretty common for the FHA loan. In general, we put 30 years. That's just what the standard is. Now, you're not bound to the document. Your loan product does not have to be exactly as this document says, but this is something that happens pretty common. Now, this is the interest rate. So if we happen to know the exact interest rate that you have, because of course you're pre-approved before we even submit an offer, then we may put it here. But many times I'll just put market, whatever the market rate is. Our FHA loan is always a fixed loan, and it's institutional, meaning it's not from a seller, it's not from a hard money lender, it's institutional. Now here we put who the lender is, lender or lenders that we're working with. So as you know, we work with Nexa Mortgage quite a bit, so we'll put that in there. And then this here, now this is just some things you can take a look at, but the finance contingency is something that we fill in. And what the finance contingency says is, the finance contingency, this is the number of days that the lender has to make sure that you are approved for this specific loan. So it could be as little as 10 days, 12 days. I try to have the longer amount of time that I can, but I don't want it to become unattractive. So I'll usually do somewhere between 15 and 19 days. So I'll put 18 days here. The rest of this stuff, there's really not much for you to fill in. This just basically says that if the loan is not approved by the lender and we're notified of that before the 18th day, the buyer can terminate the contract and their earnest money is not at risk. Now, the only way that this doesn't work is if the buyer was denied simply because they did not turn in the paperwork that the lender needed, or they did not pay any monies that the lender required, such as paying for an appraisal, etc. But other than that, this is one of the benefits of this exhibit and how it protects you. Now here, this is the appraisal contingency part of this exhibit that states that if this property does not appraise for at least the purchase price, which is $202,000, again, we can walk away because it is an appraisal contingency. We add that because no lender is ever going to loan you more money than what the property is valued at by the appraisal. Now, you can always bring more money, but the lender is not going to give you more than what the appraised value is. So we want to make sure we put that in there. All right, the upfront fee for FHA is 1.75%, and you can either pay that in full in closing or it can be added to the loan amount. And we'll make that decision based on a case-by-case basis. Usually, we add it to the loan. Closing costs. Remember, we did ask for closing costs, and tax service fees are included in that closing cost contribution that we asked for. And then this says who pays for repairs that are required by the FHA. So these are things that the Federal Housing Authority, or if this was a VA loan, the Veterans Administration, these are the things they say that we absolutely will not allow you to have a deed transfer and pay a loan for this property until these things are fixed. So with FHA, they're not terribly stringent, but there are a few things that they absolutely won't let you do. If the property is known to have water intrusion from the outside, FHA will not ever pass that property for a loan. Or if there's black mold, that's been identified. Again, that's a deal killer for FHA until it's taken care of. So whether the seller wanted to or not, let's say the seller says, you know what, instead of us taking care of the black mold, we'll give you $10,000. Well, even still, even with that, the Federal Housing Authority will not allow a deed transfer until that's taken care of before closing. So, but it's not a blank check. So we always put in here how much of FHA required repairs that the seller must do. Now, sometimes they come back and they counter this amount, but I usually say up to $1,000. Now here, this just says that we want to make sure that the utilities are on for the inspection. So if, let's say, we get to the house and we know the power is out, well, the inspector's going to need the power on, and we would like for the seller to take care of that. We don't want to have to put the power on for a property that we don't own. So this is where we put that in here. And then we're saying as long as the connection fee is not more than, and I usually put in $250, we want you to pay to make sure all the utilities are connected. Now here, this arm's length transaction, this just says that there's no relationship between buyer and seller. And that's important for FHA because they would prefer not to do home loans between husband and wife, mom and dad, etc. So everybody would sign here, and that is the FHA exhibit. And so just wanted to explain this next document that we may see, hopefully not, but most contracts have them. So as you know, once we get a property under contract and it's binding, meaning all parties have agreed and we're now binding, the very next thing we want to do is make sure that the property gets inspected. Now, depending on the size of the property, the inspection could cost somewhere between probably $325 to about $500. And we'll get that set up. The inspector's going to go out and take care of the inspection. Now, he's going to look at the mechanicals, such as the furnace, the AC unit, the plumbing, the electrical, the roof, the foundation, things like that. And he may look at a few cosmetic things as well. Now, every single property has something, and we're not going to quibble over little things, but anything that's very costly or very concerning, we may ask the seller to take care of. And we do that with an amendment to address concerns with the property. So this is an amendment, meaning it comes after we've already agreed on the original contract. And that what this says is, hey, for that property, we still want to buy your property, but we need you to take care of these few things. So we're asking that seller to repair the leak in the roof. We may also say that we want the seller to repair the, what's one that comes up a lot? Oh, the garage door, that comes up a lot. Garage door opener on the left side. And whatever we put, I'd always put in, see report page 4. And I may say something like that. Or I may say sometimes we'll ask for the seller to have the. Oh, sometimes this is what comes up. Seller to have an expansion tank added to the water heater. That comes up sometimes. As the water heater as required on page 6, something like that. So whatever it is, we may ask for maybe 5 or 6 or 7 things, and then the seller can make a decision about what they want to do. So we kind of call this negotiation number 2. So let's say we ask for these 3 things, and the seller says, okay, we'll fix the leak in the roof. So we'll send this off, we'll sign it, and then we'll send it on off. And then they may get it and say, yep, no problem, we'll do all three of these things. And so if they do, they sign it, they send it back, we fill in the acceptance date. Or they may say, hey, they may counter us and they may say, well, we're going to take care of the leak in the roof and the garage door opener, but we're not adding the expansion tank because that's a new code, is not, necessarily required, and our water heater is new. So they may say that. They may say something like that. So whatever it is, when it comes back, if we agree, and they'll initial. If we agree to everything, then we'll initial, and again, would have it binding. So that is the amendment to address concerns. It's now part of the contract. So let's say that they agree to repair the leak in the roof, and they agree to repair the garage door opener, and then 2 days after closing, that same spot is leaking again. They agreed to take care of it, but clearly they did not. So now this contract or this amendment is part of the contract, and it survives the closing, so we can kind of go back and say, hey, you guys didn't take care of this, you're still responsible. So that is the amendment to address concerns with the property.